I have good news, I have bad news, and I have some good news again. So stick around and we'll explore together why life is so unfair. Hi, and welcome to Explained. First of all, if we want to talk about life being unfair, we have to address the issue of what does fairness mean. And fairness really is just a measure of impartiality, what we believe to be just and right. And so unfairness is a little bit of the opposite of that. When we believe things are not so impartial, they're not so just, and they're not right. The problem with that is the moment that we start saying something is not right, we land in the trap of saying, but what is the measure against which we decide what is right? What is the guideline for something to be right? And it becomes a little bit messy with the result that a lot of it has to do with perspective. And let me try and explain to you. If I were to go to a homeless person and I were to ask them if it's fair that I drive a nice car, I have food on the table and I have a house, they no doubt will suggest that it's not fair. And that most likely there would be some explanation of unfairness of why I have that and they don't. But at the same time, if I go to a private school, a very affluent private school, and I ask the children there whether they think it's fair that they can wear all these labeled clothing, have all the latest and greatest cell phones, they would probably not tell me that it's unfair that they get to have that and a lot of children in the world don't have food. And so what I'm trying to illustrate is that often we look at life as being unfair only when we're on the receiving end of the stuff we believe that we are entitled to. It's only when we think, I'm entitled to, I should have all these things. And if I don't get that, then it's unfair. So I'm entitled to what is right. But what is right? Is it right that a child doesn't have food? No, that's not right. Is it right that you get to have labeled clothing and I don't? Through nothing that you did as a child, but something that your parents or your grandparents told, or maybe because you were born in a certain city or country, that's why you have this stuff. How is that fair compared to the child that was born in a third world country? Nothing that the children did actually resulted in them having that. So how can it be fair that the one has it and the other doesn't? And so a lot of our opposition to this notion that life is unfair has to do with our own entitlement, and therein lies a bit of the bad news. In that, if we believe that we are entitled to something and we're not getting it, that is when we start feeling the disgruntledness of this unfairness. But if we are able to keep our eyes open to all the times that life is unfair in our favor, it'll be easier to accept the times when life is not fair and the unfairness is not in our favor. And that brings us to call it systemic or structural reasons for unfairness. Sometimes the stars just align in a certain way that for some people certain things work out and for others not. And the book by Malcolm Gladwell, Outliers, really illustrates that quite well. That people who we believe to be outliers are not necessarily outliers. They factors of circumstances outside of their control. They still had to capitalize on it. And probably the greatest example is Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, who were born within 9 months of each other. And had they been 9 or 10 years younger or older, would not have been able to capitalize on this revolution that the personal computer industry brought. But they were fortunate to be born in America, living in the right environment, living in the right age, being in the right age group, and a lot of stars had to align. That's grossly unfair to a lot of people who had similar talents, similar work ethics, but not the opportunities. So we have to sometimes accept that even though it aligned for other people, that we're not necessarily entitled to the fortunes of the others, because we would only feel that it's unfair if we feel that we're also entitled to be born in the right time, in the right place in history so that we can capitalize on it. And it brings me to what Bill Gates said about the rules of life, that the first rule is to know that life is unfair and to accept that. And a lot of that acceptance lie in the ability to realize that sometimes life is unfair to my benefit and sometimes life is unfair against me and not to my benefit and to my detriment. And that acceptance takes a lot of the rebelliousness out, the unhappiness. So I hope you realize that that's the bad news, is that although life is unfair and we can understand why it's unfair, the bad news is that we just have to cope with it. We just have to live with it, and we have to understand and learn the discernment between what it is that we can change and what it is that we can't change, and to focus on the things that we can change to better our luck and therefore create more fairness in our favor, and what it is that we cannot change and where life will simply be unfair because of a number of reasons. And so the perspective of fairness is quite important, because we could so easily look at a homeless person and say, but it's not fair that that homeless person has so much time on their hands. Whereas the homeless person can look at us and say, it's not fair that you have the car, the house, the food. It really is a matter of perspective and what you believe you are entitled to. So the little bit of good news is that you are actually in control of how you feel about this notion of unfairness. You can decide how to deal with this idea that life is unfair and accept that it's only unfair when I decide for it to be unfair, and if I decide for the unfairness to get to me over those matters that I cannot control. So I hope that helps you. Leave a comment below if you agree, disagree, like the video if you do. Thank you for watching. My name is Louis, and you're watching Explain.